All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into that huge summit in Alaska between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. You know, the one that promised peace, but, well, it delivered something else entirely.
So what was really going on behind all that spectacle? And, maybe more importantly, what does it mean for the rest of us, especially for a key U.S. partner like India, right?
Okay, so before we can even talk about the handshakes and the photo ops in Alaska, we've got to take a step back. We need to understand why this meeting was such a massive deal. And that whole story, it really starts a few years earlier, with the incredibly brutal war in Ukraine.
So here's the timeline. By August 2025, you're looking at more than 3 long, grinding years of war. We're talking staggering casualties on both sides. The pressure from, well, everyone, to find some kind of off-ramp was just immense. And really, that's the pressure that forced these two leaders to finally meet face-to-face right on U.S. soil.
Now, a really big piece of the U.S. strategy here was this economic weapon, something called secondary tariffs. What does that mean? Well, it's basically a tool to punish any other country that keeps doing business with Russia. It's a way of saying, if you help them, you're going to feel the pain too.
And look, this wasn't just some vague threat. For a country like India, which buys a ton of Russian oil, the number they were looking at was a massive 50% tariff. I mean, that's an economic hammer, plain and simple, designed to force a really tough choice.
So with stakes that high, you'd think maybe you get some quiet, intense diplomacy, right? Nope. What the world got instead was a masterclass in political theater. The big question is, though, was there any actual substance behind all that style?
I mean, from the second Putin's plane landed, it was pure spectacle. You had the red carpet rolled out on the tarmac, a B-2 stealth bomber doing a flyover, and they even shared a ride in the presidential limo, the Beast. This was all about projecting power, projecting respect. It was a show.
But, okay, behind all that flash, the two leaders did sit down. They spent nearly 3 hours in direct, closed-door talks, supposedly trying to figure out a way to end this war.
And when he came out, Trump was just glowing. He called the meeting a 10 out of 10 and said, it's good when two big powers get along. But, as we're about to see, that super friendly tone was hiding a massive, fundamental disagreement on the most important issues.
All right, so all that pomp and circumstance, a 10 out of 10 meeting, what did it actually get us? Well, the cold hard reality is nothing. Despite all the positive spin, the summit ended without a single breakthrough.
Yeah, Trump himself basically confirmed it. In his own words, he said, "There's no deal until there's a deal." The summit made for some incredible headlines for sure, but an actual signed deal, not even close.
And if you want to know why it failed, it really boils down to this. They had completely different goals. Trump was there to broker a deal, right then and there. But Putin, he wasn't even ready to talk about a deal until his list of what he called the root causes was on the table.
So what are these so-called root causes? Well, they're basically Russia's non-negotiable demands. Things like getting the world to recognize the territory it's taken in Ukraine, a guarantee that Ukraine will never, ever join NATO, the demilitarization of the country, and getting rid of its current president. To put it bluntly, it's pretty much a list of terms for a Ukrainian surrender.
And then there was this really telling moment. Putin, who almost never speaks English in public, looked at the cameras and said, "Next time in Moscow." It was a confident move, and a lot of people saw it as a huge PR win for him, kind of shifting the power dynamic right there in public.
Okay, so the summit's a bust. It's at a total impasse. The focus now starts to shift, right? How do the shockwaves from this failure ripple outwards? How does it affect other big players, especially a country like India that's caught right in the middle of all this?
So where does India fit into this puzzle? Well, the answer really lies in that strategy Trump was using, trying to use economic leverage to squeeze Russia and force them to the negotiating table.
And Trump was totally upfront about it. He said, "When I told India that we will charge you tariffs, it put pressure on Russia." The whole idea was to hurt Russia's wallet by taking away one of its biggest, most reliable oil customers.
You can see how this creates a huge problem, right? On one side, you have the U.S. saying, stop buying Russian oil or face these massive tariffs. And on the other, you have India sticking to its long-held policy of strategic autonomy, basically saying, hey, our oil purchases are based on economics, not politics.
But here's the really interesting part, the twist in the story. Did the strategy actually work? Well, the data from right around that time, August 2025, it actually shows India increased its oil purchases from Russia. They essentially called the bluff and defied the American pressure.
So now you've got a failed summit and a pressure campaign that didn't really work. This leaves everybody in a state of, well, deep uncertainty. So what happens now? Where does this very shaky road lead next?
For the moment, that tariff hammer hasn't come down. The threat against India is kind of on pause. But Trump was really clear, this isn't over. He called it a short-term break of just 2 or 3 weeks. So yeah, the clock is definitely ticking.
And all of this leaves us with a whole bunch of huge unanswered questions. Like, is there any chance of a three-way summit with Ukraine's President Zelenskyy? Is the fighting just going to get worse? And for a country like India, this is the big one. Can you actually maintain a policy of strategic autonomy when the pressure is this intense?
You know, it's not just other countries questioning this strategy. Even back in the U.S., there were major doubts. You had the House Foreign Affairs Committee Democrats coming out and saying that tariffing India won't stop Putin. Their argument was that it just punishes an important ally without actually doing anything to deter Russia.
And so this all brings us to one final, pretty provocative question. With diplomacy totally at a standstill, is this what the future of this conflict looks like? Is the new battlefield not going to be fought with tanks and soldiers, but with economic pressure, with tariffs and trade wars?